Somewhere in our 30s or 40s, we're told we'll settle down. That phrase is soaked in comfort, tradition, and safety. Buy a house, raise a family, stick to a career. But then 60 rolls around, and that promise of peace starts to feel suspiciously hollow. And Terence McKenna, radical, unfiltered, and deeply curious, would have asked, settle down, into what? Into a routine, into boredom, into death. McKenna believed that culture is not your friend. That much of what we call normal life is a domestication of the human spirit. After 60, many begin to realize that the chase for normalcy hasn't made them more alive. It has often dulled them. Suddenly, the retirement dream doesn't sparkle the way it used to. The house feels too quiet. The goals feel far away, or worse, meaningless. And that's where the shift begins. Why does the idea of settling suddenly feel like a trap? Because after 60, you've lived long enough to see through the script. You've tasted love, disappointment, victory, loss. You've watched the world change. And maybe you didn't keep up, or maybe you were never supposed to. But in those moments of solitude or late-night restlessness, something ancient stirs. Her question bubbles up, what now? And maybe deeper still, what was all that for? McKenna urged us to challenge the consensus trance, the sleepwalking of ordinary life. After 60, many realize that they've been participating in a play they didn't even audition for. The roles were assigned, the costumes pre-chosen, the lines memorized from sitcoms, sermons, and suburban dinner parties. But now there's a crack in the set. The fourth wall has collapsed. You're backstage, older and wiser, asking, do I still want this script? This is not about regret. It's about liberation, about seeing that settling down often meant shrinking down, trimming the wild edges of who you are to fit into something manageable. But McKenna reminds us, the mind is not meant to be managed, it's meant to explore. And so after 60, life starts to make less sense and more truth. The truth that you're still here. That time hasn't expired, it's intensified. That the urge to live vividly doesn't die with youth, if anything, it awakens. So what if settling down was never the goal? What if you're only now stepping out of the illusion and finally into your own life? In youth, being busy feels like a badge of honor. Every calendar filled, every hour accounted for. But after 60, something begins to shift. The urgency fades, and with it, the illusion that staying busy means staying relevant. For decades, the American ethos has worshipped productivity. Don't just sit there, do something. We're conditioned to believe that motion equals meaning, but Terence McKenna would argue the opposite, that stillness, introspection, and disengagement from the cultural machine are not signs of decay, but signals of awakening. Many people over 60 feel a strange guilt when they're not constantly doing something. They feel they must justify their rest, their slower pace, their silence. But who decided that rest was laziness, that leisure was weakness? McKenna often spoke about how culture creates invisible cages, expectations so deeply embedded that we don't even recognize them as prisons. Staying busy is one of those cages. It keeps us from asking deeper questions. It numbs us. And when we finally slow down, in retirement or after the kids leave or once our body demands it, the silence can feel deafening. Why? Because for the first time, we're not distracted. And what meets us in that quiet? Ourselves. It's easy to confuse distraction with purpose, but when you reach 60, you start to realize you've already proven enough. You've done the jobs. You've shown up for others. You've given years of your life to tasks and roles. Now the question becomes, can you be still and not feel shame? McKenna encouraged direct experience, the kind of unfiltered consciousness that comes only when we're not busy escaping ourselves. After 60, you may begin to crave that kind of presence. Not busyness, not noise, but awareness. Imagine walking in the morning, not because you should, but because the air feels good on your face. Sitting with a cup of coffee, not as a quick caffeine fix, but as a sacred ritual. These aren't small pleasures. They are forms of resistance against a system that taught us to equate slowness with uselessness. The truth? Life isn't a race. And after 60, you're not behind. You're just waking up from a long collective trance. Busyness kept you safe, but also numb. Now, stillness feels strange, but also sacred. The world will keep spinning in its chaos, but you can finally choose to just be. And maybe that's where real power begins. For most of life, approval is currency. We dress for it, work for it, even sacrifice our truth for it. We crave being seen, validated, accepted. But something happens after 60. The craving begins to rot. Not because we stop caring, but because we start waking up to the price we've paid. Terence McKenna didn't care much for public approval. In fact, he saw it as a mechanism of control, a way culture keeps people obedient and silent. He believed that chasing approval often meant abandoning authenticity. And when you cross into your 60s, you've likely spent decades shape-shifting to meet others' expectations, family, bosses, friends, even strangers. But now, you start to see the absurdity of it all. How many times did you bite your tongue just to keep the peace? How many dreams were deferred so no one would think you were unrealistic? How much of your personality was edited just to avoid conflict? After 60, those questions start to haunt, not in a bitter way, but in a clarifying one. You start to ask, why was I ever trying to impress people I didn't even respect? The truth is, the older you get, the more you realize that most people are too busy with their own insecurities to ever fully approve of you anyway. The chase was rigged. The approval you were seeking may never have come, and if it did, it was likely temporary, conditional, shallow. McKenna called for personal sovereignty, a radical return to your own center. And that begins when you stop waiting for someone else to tell you your life has value. Especially after 60, you don't need permission anymore. You've earned the right to not care. And here's the paradox. The less you chase approval, the more you attract respect. Not because you're trying to be liked, but because you're finally honest. And honesty has gravity. When you're younger, being misunderstood can feel devastating. But after 60, being misunderstood can feel like freedom. You're no longer obligated to explain yourself to everyone. You stop auditioning. You stop apologizing for your needs, your boundaries, your preferences. And in that quiet, something miraculous happens. You begin to approve of yourself, not the idealized self. The real one, bruises, contradictions, flaws and all. Approval from others may have once felt like safety. But now, after all you've lived, you know better. The only approval that really matters is your own. In the American psyche, life is often framed as a competition. Climb the ladder, build the legacy, win. But after 60, that metaphor starts to break down. You look around and ask, what exactly was I trying to win? And at what cost? Terence McKenna rejected the idea that life should be treated like a game with winners and losers. He saw it as an experience, fluid, mysterious, undefinable. The need to win was to him a byproduct of cultural programming, a distraction. And by the time you've reached your 60s, many begin to feel that gnawing emptiness that comes after reaching a goal, and finding it doesn't deliver what it promised. You spent decades trying to get there. More money, a better title, a bigger house, a thinner body, smarter kids, higher status. But after 60, the scoreboard starts to fade. No one is keeping track anymore, not in the way you thought. And worse, the metrics that once gave you pride start to feel irrelevant. Who cares about the car when you're worried about your mobility? What does that corner office mean now that you're retired? Was the sacrifice and the missed birthdays, the suppressed joy, the chronic stress worth it? McKenna warned against mistaking symbols for substance. Our culture dangles trophies, prestige, possessions, power to keep us running. But after 60, if you're honest, you begin to notice the trophies gather dust, the applause dies down, and you're left alone with yourself. That's not a tragedy, that's a gift. Because when the need to win dissolves, you begin to explore what really matters. Connection, meaning, peace, curiosity, art, nature, laughter that isn't forced, time that isn't scheduled. And ironically, that's when the richness begins. Not the wealth you can measure, but the kind that makes life feel whole. The game you thought you had to win, it was never real. There are no final scores, no medals, just moments, lived fully or missed entirely. After 60, it no longer makes sense to compete for a life someone else designed. You get to ask, what does success mean to me now? And maybe it looks nothing like what you were taught. Maybe it's smaller, quieter, deeper. Or maybe it's wilder, stranger, more honest. Whatever it is, it's yours now, not society's, not your parents', not the corporate ladders, just yours. One of the most haunting beliefs people carry after 60 is that time is running out. The media reinforces it. Doctors hint at it. Even casual conversations are laced with it. At our age, or you never know how much time you've got left. It's true that the body ages, that mortality becomes less abstract. But Terence McKenna invites us to look at time differently, not as a countdown, but as a dimension of experience. In his view, time is elastic. It expands or contracts depending on our awareness. And when you're deeply present, time isn't slipping away, it's unfolding. Yet most people over 60 are subtly haunted by the ticking clock. They ask themselves, is it too late to start over, to travel, to forgive, to learn something new? These questions are not about time, they're about permission. And more often than not, what's running out is not time. It's the will to believe you still can. This belief that certain things are too late is part of the cultural trance McKenna warned about. It tells us life has stages, and once you're past a certain one, you must settle for less. But if you examine that closely, it's absurd. Trees bloom again every year. The earth doesn't say, I've already had a spring. So why should you? What if you stopped measuring time by the clock and started measuring it by presence? A year spent numb is shorter than a single hour lived vividly. You may have less chronological time ahead, but more capacity now to live consciously. And that makes all the difference. In fact, after 60, your awareness often sharpens. You notice details others overlook. You savor. You edit your time more wisely. You don't waste hours with people who drain you. You stop saying yes to things that don't feel true. That's not limitation, that's clarity. McKenna once said, "The imagination is the goal of history," meaning it's not about how long we live, it's about how deeply we see. And after 60, your ability to see has ripened. You've been through the fires. You know what matters. That makes every moment more alive. So instead of asking, how much time do I have left? Try asking, what can I bring to this moment? Because the truth is, time isn't running out. It's only just beginning, when you finally begin living from you. There comes a point, often after 60, when life stops adding up neatly. Things you thought would have clear answers remain open. People you trusted change. Loved ones pass without closure. Your own emotions surprise you, and the question becomes, does any of this make sense anymore? Terence McKenna would likely say, no. And that's exactly the point. We're conditioned to believe that life is a puzzle meant to be solved, that if we just read enough, meditate enough, work hard enough, we'll finally understand everything. But McKenna saw reality as something far stranger, not a logical machine, but a living mystery. And when you're over 60, you've seen too much to pretend otherwise. You've seen good people suffer. You've seen justice fail. You've done everything right and still faced heartbreak. At a certain point, you realize the quest for answers can become a trap, especially when it keeps you from feeling the richness of what's actually happening. It's tempting to want resolution, to tie a bow on the past, to wrap grief in explanations, to look back on your life like a story that should make sense. But real life isn't a story. It's a field of experience, and sometimes the most honest thing you can say is, I don't know why that happened, but I lived it. And I'm still here. McKenna often said that part of waking up means surrendering to the unknown, letting go of the need to control, to explain, to reduce the vastness of life into neat labels. And after 60, many people finally begin to feel that shift. Not because they've given up, but because they've grown up. Trying to make everything make sense often leads to rigidity. You become afraid of mystery. You fear change. You resent complexity. But when you allow things to not make sense, something opens, a softness, a deeper kind of peace. You begin to accept that love doesn't always follow logic, that forgiveness can come without understanding, that beauty doesn't require explanation, that you, in all your contradictions, are enough, even without the full picture. And maybe that's the real wisdom of aging, learning to live inside the question, not just chasing answers, sitting with what's unresolved, holding space for what will never be clear. In that surrender, there's healing. Not the kind that fixes, but the kind that frees. Because life may never fully make sense, but it can still be full of meaning. Slowing down should feel natural after 60, like the tide pulling back after years of crashing forward. But in modern culture, especially in the US, it's often laced with shame. Slowness is mistaken for decline. Rest is framed as laziness. And aging becomes a quiet apology instead of a respected transition. But Terence McKenna rejected that entire narrative. He believed that our obsession with speed, efficiency, and perpetual motion is a symptom of a sick society, one that fears introspection. And in that context, slowing down isn't weakness, it's rebellion. Yet many people over 60 internalize the shame. They feel guilty for moving slower, for needing more time to process, for stepping away from the pace of the younger world. They avoid mentioning their fatigue, their forgetfulness, their physical changes, as if aging were a personal failure. But ask yourself, who benefits from that shame? Not you. McKenna once described culture as an operating system that's loaded into you without your permission. And in that system, productivity equals worth. So when you slow down, you start to feel worthless, not because it's true, but because you were programmed to believe it. Here's the truth. Slowness after 60 is not regression, it's evolution. It's the body's natural wisdom saying, now is the time to listen more than chase, to feel more than force, to integrate, not accumulate. In slowness, you start to notice what you missed before, the subtlety of a breeze, the tone behind someone's words, the joy of doing one thing at a time. Slowness sharpens your awareness, and that awareness is where real presence lives. But culturally, we haven't been taught how to honor this phase, we've only been taught how to resist it. Which is why so many people try to hide their age, power through pain, or pretend they still belong to the race, even when their soul is begging them to step off the track. McKenna would have said, step off, leave the race, walk into the unknown with grace. Because slowing down isn't giving up, it's tuning in. It's in this slowing that your true voice returns. The voice that isn't rushed, interrupted, or filtered for approval. The voice of someone who has seen enough to know, not everything worth doing needs to be done quickly. So let the world keep spinning fast. You can move at the speed of truth now. There's a quiet fear that often surfaces after 60, not always spoken but deeply felt. Will I be forgotten? It's not just about legacy. It's about relevance, connection, meaning. After a lifetime of being needed, by work, by family, by community, the stillness can feel like erasure. Terence McKenna understood the human need for significance, but he also challenged where we seek it. He believed that culture trains us to outsource our value, to jobs, to status, to how useful we appear to others. But what happens when those roles fade? When no one's calling for your advice, your labor, your presence, you begin to wonder, do I still matter? This fear of being invisible is magnified in a world obsessed with youth. The media barely reflects older lives with depth. Tech culture moves on without pause. Even family can become distracted. And so many over 60 quietly shrink, withdrawing not from lack of desire, but from the creeping belief that their voice no longer carries weight. But McKenna might say this, you were never meant to be remembered by everyone. You were meant to be fully known by yourself. It's a radical idea that your existence doesn't need to be validated by others to be valuable. That your worth isn't measured by how many people remember your name, but by how fully you inhabit your remaining days. And yet, we are human. We ache to be seen, to leave something behind. So perhaps the fear of being forgotten isn't a flaw. It's an invitation to express what hasn't been said, to write letters, share stories, pass down the hard-won wisdom that no one else can offer, not as a desperate grab at legacy, but as a gift for your children, your community, yourself. McKenna often spoke of the power of direct experience, that what you've lived cannot be erased. Even if no one else remembers, you do. Every love, every heartbreak, every lesson etched into your being. That is not nothing. That is a library of human depth. And maybe being forgotten isn't the enemy. Maybe it's freedom. Freedom to live without performance, to speak without strategy, to feel without filter. Because you are not a brand. You are not a timeline post. You are a presence. And even if the world forgets your name, your essence, the way you showed up, loved, listened, forgave, that echoes far beyond memory. After 60, there's a subtle pressure to stay positive, to smile through pain, to be grateful no matter what. But Terence McKenna would say this demand for positivity isn't enlightenment, it's denial. Life is not always light. It's loss, anger, grief, and those emotions deserve space. You've earned the right to feel deeply without masking it for others' comfort. Real wisdom isn't about pushing pain away, it's about letting truth in. When you stop pretending everything's fine, you start to live more honestly, and that honesty becomes your strength. After decades of trying to belong in work, family, or society, you begin to question the cost. McKenna warned against conforming to systems that numb the soul. And now, in your 60s or beyond, the desire to fit in feels unnecessary. You were never meant to be ordinary. You were meant to be real. And finally, you have the freedom to live that way, without apology, without editing. The goal isn't to be accepted by everyone. It's to be at peace with yourself. That's not rebellion, that's truth.